Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A friend of mine, Michelle Capobianco, who's got a really interesting job as Chief Executive Officer at Pancreatic Cancer Canada Foundation, posted recently about leadership and what her vision was for 2023 and back to work and some other issues. And so I thought, number one, it would be interesting to chat with her about that, but then also obviously very interesting to talk about what she's doing as CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Canada Foundation. Michelle Capobianco, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So why don't we just start off by, if maybe you could tell us a little bit about Pancreatic Cancer Canada and what you do.
Absolutely. So pancreatic cancer is the worst of the worst. It has a 90% mortality rate. And the statistics haven't changed in over 50 years. It's the only major cancer where the incident rate is rising and the survival rate is stagnant. So it is a shocking disease that's in desperate need of more funding. At Pancreatic Cancer Canada, we raise money for research, which we fund around the world. We also provide support to patients and their families and education to physicians as well as to patients and people who might get the disease. It's quite shocking, the number of doctors who will say, you've got pancreatic cancer, that's it, go home. They aren't really, go home and get ready to die. They're not aware that there are some treatment options, very limited, but there are treatment options. And the most important thing is to get to a high volume center and get a second opinion.
Why is the incidence so high and going higher?
It's just not getting detected. The problem with pancreatic cancer is the location of the pancreas in part. So it's hidden, it's behind your stomach. It's a relatively small organ. It's not seen on routine ultrasounds. You need to have an MRI or a CT scan to see it. The symptoms are pretty vague. Mild back pain, mild nausea, sleeplessness, itchy skin. Often we will put off even going to a doctor with those kinds of symptoms. When we do go to a doctor, they spend precious months trying to determine if it's something else. The likelihood is it is something else. The problem is if it's pancreatic cancer, it needs to get treated immediately because by the time it is noticed, it is usually at stage 3 or stage 4.
And what are the potential things one can do with pancreatic cancer? Are there any remedies? Are there any pharmaceuticals?
So there's one definite route, which is surgery. It's called the Whipple. It's a very long, extensive surgery. It's 13 hours. Only 20% of patients qualify for the Whipple, meaning the location of the tumor on the pancreas is somewhere that the Whipple can resolve. The Whipple has seen success. There are survivors who have gone through the Whipple and are still alive today. That is the main way to rid yourself of the tumor. There are radiation methods that can be used to shrink the tumor, and there's chemotherapy that can be used. But the survival rate is still incredibly low.
Now, you say the incidence is up, but it's because of lack of detection. Is there any other reason? Is there anything environmental, or is there anything that we do that causes higher incidence of pancreatic cancer?
Yeah, so sort of the standard things with cancer. I mean, there's certainly environmental causes. There is a small genetic component. Living a good lifestyle, low on red meat, low on alcohol, high on exercise are all the important things to deter cancer. But that is not to say that if you are taking good care of yourself, you still might not get pancreatic cancer. There's still a lot of unknowns with the disease.
Why itchy skin as a symptom? That's kind of strange.
It's interesting. Part of the skin changes also come because often your bile duct will be blocked, and so going into your liver. And that's often a change of hue in your eyes or your skin changing is often what finally leads doctors to detection.
You have a logo that I thought was kind of strange. Something about we've raised enough sympathy.
It's time to raise survival. It is a bold and different way to look at the disease. What often happens with pancreatic cancer is people's initial reaction when they hear someone they care about has the disease is to say, oh, that's the one where you die. And that's it. It's just that there's no sense of we can fight this, we can band together, we can really work on it and raise money, as there has been for other cancers like breast cancer, where you saw people really coming together and changing the disease. We really want to change the dialogue and talk about this is not just something that you feel badly about and then don't do anything about. This is something you actually need to take action on. People who are living with pancreatic cancer don't need your sympathy. They need money put into research that'll bring around cures so this doesn't happen to other people. And we've had great success with that slogan. I can tell you that people living with the disease and people who have lost someone to the disease really appreciate it, and it really resonates with them.
Why haven't we put enough money into research?
There's a number of challenges for that. First of all, researchers in Canada have to spend at least 50% of their time chasing funding. So they're not in the labs, they're actually chasing funding. If you're going to have to spend half your time chasing funding, you're going to want to research a cancer where there is money available. For those other cancers where there have been survivors and there have been big improvements like breast cancer, there is significantly more money available for research. And so those projects tend to get taken up. Researchers tend to go into those types of cancers, and there's very little left for things like pancreatic. We don't have enough survivors speaking up. We don't have government money being put in. Larger cancer organizations ignore this disease, so it gets left behind.
Why wouldn't some of the same, drugs and same surgeries and same processes assist one cancer as well as another?
It's interesting. We tend to think of cancer sort of as one disease, and it's just cancer, and it is over 200 different diseases. There are many different pancreatic cancers, even within that one. And so medicine just hasn't gone far enough on how to tackle each individual cancer. The pancreas, as I mentioned earlier, is buried behind your stomach. It also has a hard shell called a stroma on the outside of it, which makes it hard for many chemotherapies to be able to get into the actual organ. So it has a lot going against it, unfortunately.
And so one would potentially go get tested for pancreatic cancer if they are nauseous, sleeplessness, itchy skin, anything else?
Back pain, mild back pain between the shoulder blades that doesn't go away. But let me be clear, there's no test for pancreatic cancer. So you're going to go in often to emerge with these kind of vague symptoms, and they will do a number of different tests. If you are fortunate and you complain and it continues on long enough and they're able to do a CT or an MRI, and you get a radiologist who knows what to look for, often the pancreatic cancer will be diagnosed in emergency.
And length of survival?
Length of survival, 5 years is survival is 10%.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's a disease that needs the funding that you're raising. If people want to donate or want information, is there a site they can go to?
Yeah, pancreaticcancercanada.ca is the place to go, and you can not only donate, which we would obviously need and appreciate, but you can get information about the signs and symptoms. You can also get help. So we offer counseling, we offer an Ask an Expert program, so you can ask questions about your disease. As I mentioned earlier, getting a second opinion is so incredibly important, and we can offer assistance in that.
Why is the second opinion so critically important?
You have just been given, with a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, by and large, a death sentence. With a 90% mortality rate, you have just been given, in effect, a death sentence. You need to make sure that the disease has been identified correctly, that the placement of the tumor on the organ has been identified properly, and that you're working with somebody who knows the latest of what is happening in the disease. Because it's still considered a rare cancer, you aren't going to have specialists in every hospital across the country who have worked on this disease in the past. So you want to go to what we consider a high volume center, a hospital where they see people on a regular basis with pancreatic cancer, know what to look for, and know the various treatment options.
In the Toronto area, where's the best place to go?
Princess Margaret Hospital, Sunnybrook, either of those, St. Joseph's. We're very lucky in Toronto. It's a big center. If you live outside of a major center, you're in a bit more trouble and you're restricted to the hospitals. In Toronto, we're very fortunate.
Michelle Capobianco, the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Association Foundation of Canada. Thank you for telling us a little bit about pancreatic cancer. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Michelle. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership as well, because Michelle just posted a really interesting article about leadership, and obviously a very challenging area and a challenging time that we're all going through. And we're going to talk a little bit about fundraising. We're going to talk a little bit more about cancers and pancreatic cancers and charitable organizations. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 more minutes with Michelle Capobianco. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I find it very interesting to reach out to different leaders in our world, in our city, and find out what they're all about, and how their leadership styles differ and what they think leadership means. And Michelle Capobianco, who is someone who I've met over the years and been impressed with, and we've just chatted about her role as Chief Executive Officer at Pancreatic Cancer Canada Foundation. Posted recently a really interesting article on LinkedIn that was entitled "Meet You Where You Are: My Leadership Approach for 2023 and Beyond," and it really talks about who you are and what your leadership styles are, and going back to the office and 2023. Michelle, tell us a little bit about why you made this post.
I was really thinking about our need to start meeting patients where they are, because more and more it's been brought to our attention that patient advocacy groups are there when you are fighting the disease, when you are first diagnosed, when you are fighting, especially with a deadly disease. But when you either accept that you aren't going to beat the disease, or that is just happening and you are getting near the end of your life, patient advocacy groups are often not there. We're there for the fight, but we're not there for end of life. And we put it off into a palliative care. We put you off somewhere else. And it really occurred to me that that wasn't fulfilling our role as a patient advocate. And what we actually needed to do is to meet people where they are. So if you are at the point of a new diagnosis and you want to fight, we're there to give you all the options. If you are at another point in the disease, in your journey with it, and you are trying to come to terms with the fact that your life's ending earlier than you thought, we also need to be there and meet you there and help you with those needs. And as I thought about it from the patient perspective, it occurred to me that we also need to do this more and more with employees. I am pretty old school in the way I look at management. And I think when COVID was ending, we were all going back to work. I assumed we'd all go back 5 days a week. That's what I wanted to do. And I assumed that everybody else would do it. And look, very quickly, we've had to realize that that is not probably going to happen, that a real shift has occurred in where people work, how they work. And as leaders, we're going to have to meet people where they are and manage it differently. So it occurred to me that I could put that same lens and that same willingness to meet people wherever they're at with my employees. And how could I find a way to still meet all of our needs while meeting their needs and just being much more flexible?
So you talk about grappling with the return to the office discussion. You talk about how you personally enjoy going into the office. Why?
I really like going into the office. I like the separation between my home and my life. I mean, listen, I have 3 dogs and a 20-year-old daughter. So I think most people probably want to get out of the house if that's the case. But I like that. I like the environment, especially in my job.
You could reduce the number of dogs.
Well, no, I traded in my husband for another dog. So I thought that was a good deal, Brian.
We won't talk about that.
No, I enjoy going into it. My job is a real people job. I get most of my ideas talking to other people, certainly dealing with patients and their families. It's something we often do face to face. So I really enjoy going into the office. For me, that provides a real structure and I enjoy it. But that's not the same for everybody. And COVID proved to me and to many others that my employees could really step up and do the job wherever they were at. As women, I know how much we have to juggle. Most not-for-profit employees are women. Most of the leadership are men. Most of the employees are women. They're the ones who are juggling with a family. They're the ones who are juggling with kids. And I can tell you, even during COVID, they were often the ones, even though both the father and mother were home in the house working, it was the mother who was also managing all of the other things at the same time. And yet our employees did it and did an amazing job. We launched 2 national and an international clinical trial during COVID.
You said in your you said in your post that you raised more than $3 million last year, more than 3 times the highest that you had raised previously. So you obviously did a reasonably good job, even when people were either at home or in a hybrid kind of work environment.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First of all, our employees, number one reason we've done so well. The second thing is really going back to our motto about raising enough sympathy and raising survival. We, as an executive team and our board, made a decision that we were going to take risks and do some things differently. I told you that the statistics of this disease haven't changed in 50 years. That would suggest what we have been doing to raise money and battle this disease is not working. We are not going to cure this disease and help people by adding one more golf tournament or one more walk. We have to take risks and do things differently. So just before COVID launched, we decided to take a risk with a social media company in California. We invested with that company. We built a relationship with that company. As a result of COVID, people went in droves online and started watching much more social media and participating. And our donation dollars just skyrocketed as a direct result. But that was a risk. And it was a calculated risk. It was a risk that I tried to spread to other charities, a couple of other pancreatic charities I asked to come in with us and share the risk and share the profits. No one else wanted to do it. We took the risk. And so we reaped the rewards, which means our patients are reaping the rewards.
And so this was, how was it risky? What would, like, obviously an investment of dollars, I take it. But what were you doing on social media that was so much more impactful?
So we had a board member who was with Google, and he brought us forward to some of the YouTube team, which Google owns. And they came up with a concept of fundraising online on YouTube, but by talking about pancreatic cancer as a death sentence. So they wanted us to work with social media influencers, but they were going to talk about death and that how horrific this disease was and ask people to donate to it. We partnered with a company called the Brands and Entertainment Network, which is based in California. It's actually owned by Bill Gates. They work with social media influencers, and they have an algorithm, an AI algorithm that works to determine product placement and how people are going to respond to various initiatives, products, and charity being one of the products. They offered to work with us, but there was going to be an investment of $150,000 US. The company was also going to take a percentage of our profit and reinvest it back into the program so that we could continue to expand and grow. And they offered to put it against all social media platforms and not just YouTube. So that was the risk. We were going to go public and talk about death in a very bold way. And we were going to have to put some money into it, which is not the norm for charities, right? We spend our lives going around asking everybody to do everything for us for free. Arguably, if we could help people monetize cancer and monetize the cure for cancer, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. Too often, we want the people that work in not-for-profit to work for free, to work out of their home, to use old computers. God forbid they spend any money on anything, but yet we want you to cure cancer while you're at it. And so we really want to flip that paradigm on its head and do things differently. And we did that with the partnership with Ben.
It sounds like it's working. Are you going to continue it?
Oh, absolutely. It's worked exceptionally well. In fact, we've expanded. So Pancreatic Cancer Canada is now part of a larger entity called Pancreatic Cancer North America. And we are fundraising right across the US with social media. And we're also funding some really interesting research projects, which we're excited about.
Well, congratulations. That sounds like it's a big success. You've chosen to be in the charitable area for quite a while now. Tell me a little bit about your history to start with, if you could. You've been, I think, with pancreatic cancer since what, 2017 or something like that? And and before that, you were also in a charitable organization. Tell me about your history, your career history, if you could, and why you chose the charitable sector.
Yeah, my career has always been in the not-for-profit. So I actually did my degree in English literature, and coming out of University of Toronto, I got a degree in public relations at Easter Seals, which is a charity that works with children with physical disabilities, mostly cerebral palsy. And while I was there, they had a research arm called Easter Seal Research Institute, and they were looking for someone to fundraise in that institute. But you couldn't use any of Easter Seal's current sponsors, and you couldn't use any of their competitors going back 75 years, and nobody wanted the job. And I had this idea. I had been in the subway and I had seen them selling these red noses. I don't even remember what charity it was for. And I thought, I wonder if you could sell Easter eggs in the subway. Strangely enough, Easter Seals is not about Easter and eggs. It's more about the actual seal, the stamp. And so I got the idea, maybe I could sell Easter eggs. So I went to Gateway newsstands because they were the ones who had the right to sell product in the subway. I got them to donate some eggs. I called the Canadian Cancer Society and got them to lend me the boxes they wear around their neck and they hold when they sell daffodils. And I printed up Easter Seal Research name and I covered up the Canadian Cancer name, got a bunch of friends, went into the subway and sold eggs, raised a lot of money. So I went to Cadbury and through a series of persistent moves, I convinced the president of Cadbury to join our board and to make our very own Easter egg with our own Easter seal wrap. I convinced Shoppers Drug Mart to take them across the country, and we sold Easter eggs in Shoppers Drug Mart right across the country, made it a very large program, and I ran it for 10 years. At that point, I left work. We adopted a baby, and I wanted to be home for that, so I stayed home for 2 years. And then I decided I couldn't wait to get back to not-for-profit work. And the Multiple Sclerosis Society was looking for someone to run the carnation campaign. I thought, eggs, carnations, I can do this. I joined them. They quickly decided they'd rather me work in new business development instead. And so I started creating new programs for them, the most successful being Women Against MS. And so MS affects 3 times the number of women as it does men. So I created a program that expanded across the country that brought business women together to fight MS. And that was very successful. I stayed there 10 years. And then one of the sponsors, a woman who owns Pizzaville, the Pizzaville chain, she was also on the board of pancreatic cancer because she'd lost her sister to the disease. And she asked me to come and take on this role. And I've been here 8 years.
Fantastic. What a career. What interesting. Why does MS hit 3 times more females than males?
We don't know. We don't know that. And it's quite a debilitating disease. There are different kinds of MS, but it can be quite debilitating. And it's really important that more research being done. They've done an exceptional job of raising money for research, I would say.
When you're raising money for MS or pancreatic cancer or breast cancer, are you competing for the donation dollar with other charities, or are you trying to expand the amount of dollars donated in total? You know, like, how do you think that through? Is it Coke versus Pepsi, or is it trying to increase the number of people drinking soft drinks?
I will tell you that the politically correct response for me to give is that there's plenty of money to go around and we can all just share and bring it in. That's just BS. That's not true. We're absolutely competing. We're absolutely competing with other charities. And in fact, we're competing with hospitals, which is even that much harder. So we're in a unique position where we fund researchers at hospitals like Princess Margaret. But if there's a donor we hear about who is a wealthy donor who's been affected by pancreatic cancer, we're both going after it. And the hospital's going after that donor, and I'm going after that donor. So we are, in fact, in competition. And we do have to talk about what we offer that's different. Many people question why there are so many different cancer organizations and why we couldn't just be under one banner. And I actually agree with that. It makes sense for us to be on one banner. We'd have one executive salary instead of 10 or 15. We would be in one office, presumably, and we could really make a difference with cancer. The problem is politics. The problem is who decides what cancer is going to receive the majority of the money. Despite the fact that pancreatic cancer is the 3rd killer of cancer, it receives the least funding. Again and again, we see reports, including from the Canadian Cancer Society, who proudly came out in 2019 and announced that it was the 3rd killer and gives less than 5% of their money to pancreatic. That's the reason why organizations like mine have to compete and have to stand alone, because until there's fairness across the board of how we tackle these cancers, and we don't just go with the popular ones. And listen, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. I've survived breast cancer and thyroid cancer all in the last 6 years. So I applaud the work that's been done with these other cancers. The money they've been able to raise has led to research, which means I'm going to no doubt survive both these cancers. But it's time we take a look at some of these cancers that haven't moved at all and are incredibly devastating.
I didn't realize you had had cancer twice. I'm very glad that we're chatting today. The Canadian Cancer Society, how does it justify if pancreatic cancer is the 3rd largest killer? How does it justify only spending 5% of its dollars against pancreatic cancer?
I don't know how they justify it. I've had several conversations with them and with their board to try to change that. to change that, to work at partnering together on projects. The willingness just isn't there. Canadian Cancer Society went on quite a plan for a number of years to try and absorb as many other charities, cancer charities as possible, including prostate cancer, which has had mixed results. Prostate cancer has again started its own charity in many provinces, even despite the merger of the two. I think they spend more time trying to absorb us rather than trying to learn and partner with us. And I think it's unfortunate, but I don't see any changes from the leadership. I have regular conversations with the leadership and representatives from them. And my most recent conversation was not productive.
You're obviously familiar with the United Way and how it works. Is the United Way a good model for how to have an umbrella organization that you donate to, and then it decides how to divvy up the money?
I'm going to sound really, really negative here, but I'm going to sort of pull back the curtain and talk about it all. In general, I think the United Way is a very good model. There are plenty of charities that are very small and that don't have infrastructure, and are things like, for instance, reform for people coming out of prison. It's not a very attractive thing. You're not going to get a lot of people wanting to give money to it. So they can really benefit from being partnered with the United Way. The challenge, if you're a charity going to receive money from the United Way, is that you are not allowed to fundraise publicly during the United Way period. So this can be 2 to 3 months during the year, which we will be told, if we're going to receive money from the United Way, we can't fundraise during that time. We can't afford to do that. The second problem is the United Way has quite a stronghold on executives. They've come up with a fabulous model where they go to CEOs of banks and large organizations, and they ask them to chair each year, and they bring a very impressive executive team. But what happens is those executives go back to their companies and place pressure on their employees to only raise money for the United Way. And so when a charity like mine comes along and says to a big company, can I come in and talk to your employees about it? We're United Way. And there's no room for us. You look at United Way in the liquor stores. It then becomes a monopoly and becomes a government and doesn't like a government institution, and you're not allowed to work in there. So it's not a fair playing field by any stretch of the imagination. And yet the smaller charities are then asked, why are you existing? Why aren't you merging with a bigger one? There's some very good reasons we don't do that.
It's an interesting discussion and a fascinating argument. I've always worried that this plethora of different charitable organizations means we spend a lot more money on administration and on fundraising than we otherwise would. But too often, when you have merged entities that act like governments with big bureaucracies, you actually spend more money on bureaucracy and red tape and politics and stuff like that. So the mergers doesn't necessarily always make the most sense. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Michelle Capobianco, the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Foundation Canada. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Michelle Capobianco. We're having for me, a really interesting conversation about pancreatic cancer. I didn't realize as much about pancreatic cancer as Michelle has been kind enough to tell us about. Michelle is CEO of the Pancreatic Cancer Foundation of Canada. Michelle, if people want to donate to pancreatic cancer, how do they do that?
The easiest way is to go to the website, pancreaticcancercanada.ca.
We've talked about leadership. We've talked about building relationships in the workforce, and that you want people to go back to work, but you're okay with, I guess, the reality that some of them have been very productive at home. And so you wrote this really interesting article that we talked about meeting people where they are, which is kind of interesting. Tell me a little bit about you and your ex-husband are both very successful and influential in your separate segments of society. Can that work? Can a couple be two people that are, very successful, or tell me about that?
Well, it did work for 25 years. So yes, I think the short answer to that is that you can both be successful. I think we were successful in different areas. He was and is very involved in politics. And in some ways, working in a not-for-profit is a perfect complement to that. There's no sort of downside to saying my wife does good works all day. So I think that helped. And then, to be honest, he had great connections and still has great connections in business people and leaders. And that really helped me get introductions to other people to help raise money for the charity. Also working at a charity, that some of the pressures, at least earlier on in my career when I was in more junior positions, enabled me to be at home more and to raise our daughter. And because he traveled so extensively and was away, it was important that one of us was able to do that. So we came up with a really good balance. Listen, it's like everything in life. It's give and take. It's meeting people where they're at and figuring out what works.
Some people think you can have it all, particularly from a female standpoint, be a person in the work world and have a great career, and also being a mom and a wife, etc. And other people say, no, you can't have it all. You've got to choose one route or the other. Where do you come down on that?
I come down right somewhere in the middle. I think you can have it all, and there's a lot of compromise. I think that each woman's version of what all is different. Each woman's version of a perfect marriage, being a perfect mother, and having a perfect job is different. And you have to make accommodations. If you want to be the CEO of a company, you're going to spend less time at home. You're going to have less energy for your family. And so your definition of being a perfect mother has to change. And so I think that really resides within the individual woman. Do I think I have had it all? In many ways, yes. I think I'm a very good mother and have been a very good mother. I think I've been an exceptional employee. I think for 25 years, I was a pretty good wife. But I certainly have regrets, and I certainly could have done some things differently. I think I had it all, and I think I continue to have it all, but I'm redefining what that all looks like.
Your ex-husband was very involved in politics, as you mentioned. Politics is one of those careers that is just, it takes a ton of time. And there are so many events and so many rubber chicken dinners and so much glad handing. And he, ran for politics, but was more an organizer, I think. But, even retail politicians, they're away constantly. So many politicians get divorced. Is it possible to have a long-term marriage in a political relationship?
Absolutely. We have many examples of people that have lived long marriages with it. John is still a lobbyist and is very passionate about his job. And so politics for him was both personal and professional. And so that meant it took up a very large portion of his life. But he was exceptionally good at it and is exceptionally good at it. And you could see the joy it brought him. And so for him to be able to fulfill his dream doing those things, I think is wonderful, and a wonderful example to me to go and try and fulfill my dreams, and for our daughter to see that. Did it always make for a perfect marriage? No, it certainly didn't. He was away a lot, and that was hard, but that is a partnership and a decision we both made. And we made that decision to make the marriage work and to make his career and my career flourish in different ways. We reached a point after 25 years that I was starting to look, I had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. I was starting to look at the next 50 years of my life and what I wanted that to look like. And I wanted it to look slightly different. And so we had a conversation about that. We had a really open, honest conversation about my needs having changed and him still having the passion for work. And we made a really sane, sensible, loving decision to separate while we still cared about each other, while we're still kind to each other. It would be best for our daughter, and that we could both go and continue our lives. And it's really worked well. We celebrate holidays together. We have lunch or dinner once every couple of weeks. I can still call him if I need an introduction to someone. Hopefully he'll call me if he needs an introduction to someone, and it works.
You said during the break that you had the perfect divorce. Really?
Well, listen, we all know people, I'm sure you know people who have had pretty nasty divorces, and divorces that have gone on for years, and people that don't speak to each other anymore, and they take it out on their children. John and I were able to have a very civil, sensible conversation. We'd always talked about the fact that if we ever separated, we wanted to be fair and decent with each other. We hired one lawyer. We worked together with the one lawyer to do the divorce. John was very, I was starting to use the word generous, but John was fair and understood that he had made significantly more money than I had. during his career, in part because I had held the home together and managed things so he could. And it was always his goal that the two of us come out equal. And so that going forward in our lives, we would both have the same amount of disposable income. And so there was no argument or fight with any of those things. And to this day, I can turn to him and ask for assistance or ask for help and vice versa. So I do think it's the perfect divorce because there's no anger, there's no acrimony, there's no resentment. I think that we both have taken responsibility for our roles in the success of the marriage and our roles in the demise of the marriage.
So you had said earlier that he was a workaholic and he worked a lot, traveled a lot, was away, but sounds like you worked a lot and traveled a lot as well.
Only in the last 8 years. So the first part of my career, I didn't. I stayed home. I stayed at work, but I stayed within Canada, within Toronto. I didn't do the travel. We couldn't with a young child. But now's my turn. And now I have spent the previous 20 years learning the skills I needed to run an organization like Pancreatic Cancer Canada. And now it's my turn to travel more, to raise more money, to affect more. It's the right time for me in my life. And so that is about me having it all right now. I didn't have it the first 20 years, travel anyway, which I love, but I do have it now.
Okay, so I come back. Can a couple have a successful marriage if they're both workaholics and traveling a lot? Sounds like the only way it worked was with one person, you, being somewhat not subordinate's not the right word, but not as successful as you could have been, not working as hard, at as many hours, traveling as much as ultimately you wanted to.
Oh, there's a lot packed into those couple of sentences. I would say that I was quite successful. Whether I was traveling or not, I was quite successful, and I worked very hard and I fulfilled all of the requirements for the job. It was a decision that we made because it was important to us to have a child and for that child to have someone at home. I wanted that role. So I don't look at myself as a martyr in any way for those years. That was
You don't think you took a step back in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I absolutely did not take a step back. We both managed our lives in a way that would make us as a family move forward together in a positive way. And we did. And times have changed. Our daughter will be 21 soon. I have reached a point in my career now where I need to be away and doing more. And I'm excited to be able to do it. I've got more energy now than I've ever had. So it's worked out.
So when you talk to your daughter about mates in the future, what guidance, if any, do you give her?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Go for that successful, aggressive, workaholic, travel all the time guy, or no, someone who's going to be a little bit more laid back and spend some time with you?
I tell my daughter, before you worry about finding any man in your life, get really clear on who you are and what you need. You do not need a man on a white horse to bring you success and material goods and happiness. You need to find that within yourself first and foremost. And when you're good with that, you will naturally find the right partner for that point in your life. And listen, that partner might not be the best partner for 30 years. It might be the best partner for right now. We change and we grow. And I think that that's something she's seen through her parents' marriage as well. She's seen us married and she's seen us apart, and yet still very present in her life and loving and good to each other. And that's because we have each taken care of ourselves as well. That's what she needs to do.
It's interesting. It sounds almost like you don't see the end of the 25-year marriage as a failure. It's just a stage. It's that it was right for 25 years, but it wasn't right for longer than that.
Absolutely. I absolutely do not think of it as a failure. I had a really good marriage, and I still really love John and care about John. And we had great years. I am now at a point in my life where I want to do something different. That's all. I don't understand why there's a need to rate something as a failure. And if I bring that back to my job, it's interesting because oncologists often look at death as failure. We are all going to die. This is all going to happen. It's a stage in our life. Marriage is a stage in our life, and our health is a different stage in our life. And so I think that stopping to use language like I'm fighting cancer, I'm beating cancer, I failed at the fight, I've lost the fight. It's important that we don't use that in our health, and it's important that we don't use it in our relationships.
Great conversation with Michelle Capobianco. We're going to take a final break and be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. You know, I really enjoy this this part-time nighttime gig that I've got, meeting fascinating people and interviewing them and finding out what makes them tick and what they're all about. And I think that has really, you know, that's been what's happened tonight with Michelle Capobianco. And I really, Michelle, thank you for being open and chatting and sharing with us both the goods and the bads and the successes and not what you think is failures, because it wasn't a failure is in your mind. It was a stage in a life. And so I want to thank you for that, because I think that I've benefited from the conversation, and I hope other people will as well. You're the Chief Executive Officer of Pancreatic Cancer Canada Foundation, and we've talked about that. I wonder if you could elevate for a minute and tell me about charitable organizations in total. I often, see every time I turn on CNN, I get this advertisement for a disease I've never even heard about, and I'm asked to go and get a book, and the cost of fundraising has got to be astounding to be on CNN all the time, or a full page ad in the Globe and Mail, and the other things. How should the public think about the costs of fundraising for charitable organizations?
Thank you very much for that question. Yeah, you're right. We'll often see articles in the newspaper as well about the cost of fundraising, and we'll look at the cost of a run being 50 or 60 cents on the dollar, and donors being appalled and saying that means 40% of the money they gave is going to the cause, and they're upset about it. Here's the reality. If you really want to make a difference with the disease state, when you receive those return address labels in the mail, you'll send in a check. That's it. That is the lowest cost of fundraising. But what happens in reality is that people want to come to an event. And I think we need to step back and question why we want to go to an event. So what happens is you want to go to a walk, and you're going to show up at that walk, and you're not just going to bring yourself, you probably bring a couple of your kids, and you'll maybe bring your dog. You'll only register yourself for the walk. You've been asked to raise a minimum of $100. That's often all you raise. You'll show up, you'll want the free t-shirt. And in fact, when you're asked if you would rather not get the free t-shirt because the charity has to pay for that, over 80% of people say they want the free t-shirt. When they're driving to the park, they're very upset if there isn't great signage. They want police there controlling traffic. They want parking. They want porta potties. They expect some type of breakfast. They expect some kind of orange, some kind of snack. If they brought their kids with them, they also want a snack for their kids. They want water for their dog. They want the route well marked. There are 95,000 registered charities in Canada alone. Every one of them is trying to get free porta potties, free signage, and free oranges. It just can't happen. There is a cost to doing those things. If we continue to show up, we need to, and want to show up at events, we need to ask ourselves why. What is it that we're getting out of that? I would argue that as that woman in that example, I have the opportunity to go to my neighbors and ask them for some money, to tell them how great I am that I'm going out and raising money for a charity. I am then going to bring my kids and show them the example. I'm going to go out and show my kids the example of raising money for a charity and what that looks like. You're not doing it for the core reasons. I also then get upset that people are employed and paid for by the charity. Why do you get paid? I get that question often. I tell people I'm the CEO of a charity. Oh, you do that for free? How many hours do you spend a week volunteering for a charity? Do you put 60 hours a week in volunteering? It is a job and a profession. I am a trained professional fundraiser. It is not a matter of if you've held a bar mitzvah or you've held a garage sale, you can raise money for a charity. It's a skill. And we want people to go and raise money for cancer. Our governments aren't putting the money in. We as general Canadians aren't putting an excessive amount into charity, but they want us to do it for free. They want us to work at used computers, ideally. They don't want it to be a fancy office. They don't want you to have benefits. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous, outdated way of looking.
So why don't we
charity.
just increase taxes and have the government spend more money on charitable research and efforts and get rid of the whole charitable sector?
Listen, I'm a conservative, so I'm never going to vote for increasing taxes. What I would argue is in a country like Canada, where we're at a 50% tax, there's incredible waste right across the board. I would welcome governments taking a look at where they waste money and instead putting those into diseases and the health of Canadians. Absolutely. I would much rather see money being put into cancer research before we fund dental programs across the country.
So what's the answer?
There's no simple answer. I would suggest that Canadians take a good hard look at what they expect from charities, what they give to charities, how they give to charities, and what's important to them. I think you should question the charities that you give money to, ask them how they spend their money, and yet be educated and understand where the places are that they have to spend money. And ask if they're tackling the hard diseases. You need to decide what's important to you, what resonates with you. People survive one type of cancer, for instance, and that's what they then become passionate about, or they've lost someone and they become passionate about it. There are other people who haven't lost someone, but look at pancreatic and see it's an underdog. It's a death sentence. It hasn't changed in 50 years. What could happen if we came together and actually did something? Breast cancer is a fabulous example. 50 years ago, breast cancer has the same rates of survival as pancreatic cancer does today. A relatively small group of people got together and said, enough. We're going to start talking about breast cancer. We can now sit at the dinner table and talk about it. It's now quite open. We're going to slap pink ribbons on as many projects and products as we can, and we're going to raise money. They've changed the trajectory of breast cancer by and large, such that somebody like me, first of all, knew to look for the cancer, knew to fight to get treatment for the cancer, caught it at stage 1, and I'll live my entire life. That cancer will probably never come back because of the money that's been put into it. If we can bring that same passion to pancreatic cancer, we can really change the trajectory.
I think there's, something very positive about these events. And you didn't mention it, maybe in passing, you touched on it, but I do think that people want that social interaction. They want to be part of a community that's assisting something. I prostate cancer in November and having a mustache or something like that, I felt like I was part of something and contributing. Going on the walk, I feel like I'm part of something. Even going to a gala and listening to a speech about whatever the charitable issue is, I feel like I'm part of something bigger than me, part of something greater than me. And I do think that that's something that we crave and need and want in life, is to have that social interaction with other people and feel like you're part of something bigger than just what you do in and day out. And I don't think that's bad. I think that's great. That's wonderful. Now, maybe next time I won't ask for the t-shirt given this conversation.
Listen, I am not suggesting that you shouldn't participate. There's a lot of camaraderie that comes from bringing people together. There's a lot of awareness that comes together. I just think you need to educate yourself and understand how they got to that event, what the costs are behind it, and just put a little more thought into it.
Michelle Capobianco, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to give to your organization, Pancreatic Cancer, how do they do that?
Pancreaticcancercanada.ca. They can donate online and receive a tax receipt immediately.
It's been a real pleasure connecting up with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
That's our show for tonight, everyone. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online anywhere at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.